Last Thanksgiving, my father stood in front of 32 relatives, pointed at me like I was on trial, and grounded me. Yes, grounded me. I was 29 years old. I had my own apartment, my own car payment, my own health insurance, and a student loan balance that showed up every month, like it had separation, anxiety. But according to my father, Edward Whitmore, I was still a disobedient little girl who needed to be sent upstairs until I learned how to behave. And the worst part? Everybody laughed. Not one person stood up. Not one person said, "Edward, she's an adult." Not one person even cleared their throat in that uncomfortable way people do when they know something is wrong, but would rather chew glass than get involved. They just laughed. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 29. I live in Portland, Oregon. And I design outdoor spaces for a living. Gardens, courtyards, rooftop patios, rain gardens, that kind of thing. My father liked to describe my job as playing with dirt for people with too much money. He was charming like that. Very warm. Very supportive. The kind of man who could make a compliment sound like a parking ticket. Before he retired, my father was a judge. And trust me, he never really retired from the part where he got to act like everyone else was beneath him. He brought that courtroom voice into every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call. If Edward Whitmore disagreed with you, he didn't argue. He ruled. Thanksgiving at the Whitmore house was always less of a family gathering and more of a performance review where nobody asked to be employed. The house was packed that year. Aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, people I had not seen since I was in braces, and at least 3 relatives who only appeared when there was free food and a chance to judge someone else's life choices. The dining room looked like my mother had been preparing for a magazine shoot. White tablecloth, polished silver, crystal glasses, candles, a centerpiece big enough to block eye contact, which honestly was the most useful thing on the table. The turkey was perfect. The wine was expensive. And everyone was acting like we were the kind of family that had deep values instead of deep denial. My older brother, Nathan, sat near my father like he had been placed there by royal decree. 33 years old. Lawyer. Golden child. Professional nodder whenever Dad spoke. He had the kind of confidence you get when nobody has ever told you no without apologizing afterward. His wife, Vanessa, sat beside him wearing pearls, and that polite little smile people use when they want you to know they are better than you. But legally, my mother, Helen, moved quietly between the kitchen and the dining room, making sure everyone had what they needed. That was her role. Smooth the tablecloth. Refill the glasses. Smile when Dad made a sharp comment. Look down when things got ugly. And me? I was seated near the far end of the room. Close enough to hear everything, but far enough to know exactly where I ranked. For most of the evening, I kept my mouth shut. That had always been my safest setting around my father. Smile. Nod. Pass the rolls. Pretend you did not hear the little insult tucked inside the joke. Pretend your brother's career was the family achievement, and yours was some cute hobby you would eventually grow out of. Then Aunt Caroline asked about Grandma Margaret. The room shifted a little. Just enough. Grandma Margaret had died 2 months earlier. She was my father's mother. But she had always been more than that to me. She was the one person in that family who looked at me like I was not a problem to solve. She remembered my favorite tea. She kept my childhood drawings. She asked about my work and actually listened to the answer. My father had barely mentioned her that night except to talk about family legacy, which was his favorite phrase whenever he wanted something to sound noble instead of selfish. Aunt Caroline said, "Edward, has everything been settled with your mother's estate?" My father lifted his wineglass. "It's being handled." That was it. 3 words. The official Whitmore family way of saying, "Do not ask follow-up questions unless you enjoy being emotionally tackled." I do not know what made me speak. Maybe it was the wine I had barely touched. Maybe it was the fact that Grandma had once squeezed my hand and told me, "Claire, I took care of things." Maybe I was just tired of being treated like furniture with student debt. So I said, "What did Grandma leave me in her will?" The room went quiet. Not completely quiet. Someone's fork touched a plate. A kid coughed in the living room. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen. But the people at the table stopped moving. My father turned his head slowly. "What did you say?" I kept my voice calm. "I asked what Grandma left me." Nathan leaned back in his chair and let out a small laugh. "Claire. Just my name." Said like a warning. Like I had tracked mud across an expensive rug. My father set down his glass. "This is neither the time nor the place." "That's what you said after the funeral." I said. "And the week after that?" "And every time I've asked." Vanessa looked down at her napkin like it had suddenly become a legal document. A few cousins exchanged glances. My mother stopped moving near the doorway. Dad smiled. But it was not a happy smile. It was the smile he used when someone had made the mistake of challenging him in public. "Your grandmother trusted me to handle her affairs," he said. "She understood that certain people in this family are capable of managing responsibility. And certain people are not." There it was. Certain people. He did not have to say my name. He had trained the whole room to understand the translation. I felt my face get hot. But I did not look away. "I'm not asking to manage anything. I'm asking what she wanted." "What she wanted," he said, his voice getting sharper, "was for this family to remain stable. Not for you to turn Thanksgiving dinner into a money grab." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Money grab. I had asked one question. And somehow I was already greedy. That was my father's talent. He could take your sentence, break its legs, and then blame it for limping. "I'm not grabbing anything," I said. "I'm asking because she told me she took care of something." Nathan's smile disappeared. That was the first thing I noticed. My brother had been amused until that moment. Then his eyes moved quickly to Dad. And Dad's jaw tightened. "What exactly did she tell you?" Dad asked. I should have stopped there. I know that now. But standing in that room, with my grandmother barely cold in the ground and my family acting like I had no right to even ask, something in me refused to shrink. "She told me to trust her," I said. "She said she had taken care of things." My father laughed once. Cold. Short. "Claire. Your grandmother was 87. She said many things near the end. She wasn't confused." The words landed hard. My mother closed her eyes. Nathan sat forward. "You need to be careful." I looked at him. "Why?" He did not answer. My father did. "Because you are embarrassing yourself," he said. "You are standing here in front of this entire family acting entitled to things you do not understand." I understand enough to ask a question. "No," he snapped. "You understand nothing. You have spent your life drifting from one plan to another. Quitting law school. Taking design jobs. Renting little apartments. And calling it independence. Your brother built a real career. Your brother understands responsibility. You do not." The room was dead silent now. My chest tightened. But I kept my hands still in my lap. That was something I had learned young. Never let him see your hands shake. Then my father stepped away from the table and pointed toward the staircase. "You are grounded." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "Go upstairs. You can come back down when you are ready to apologize to your brother and to everyone else for this childish behavior." And then Uncle Rob laughed. Then one of my cousins laughed, because Uncle Rob laughed. Then Vanessa gave that soft little polished giggle. Then the whole room broke open. 32 relatives laughing, while my father sent his grown daughter to her childhood bedroom, like I had stayed out past curfew and wrecked the family minivan. I looked at my mother. She stared at the floor. That was the part that cut deepest. Not Nathan's smirk. Not Vanessa's fake little laugh. Not even my father's public humiliation routine. It was my mother sitting there, choosing the carpet over me. My father pointed again. Go. The old me would have cried. The old me would have explained. The old me would have tried to make them understand that I was not greedy. Not unstable. Not some failure begging for scraps. But in that moment, I saw something clearly. My father did not want me to explain. He wanted me to perform my usual role. Hoard. Defensive. Small. So I gave him nothing. I stood up, smoothed my sweater, and looked him straight in the eye. All right, I said. The laughter faded a little. Not because they felt bad. Because they expected more. A scene? Tears. A slammed door. Something they could use later as proof that I was exactly what Dad said I was. I walked upstairs without giving them any of it, and while they kept laughing downstairs, I closed the bedroom door, pulled out my phone, and made the one call my father never saw coming. I didn't make that phone call out of nowhere. That was the part my father never understood. He thought my all right came from fear. He thought I had finally accepted my place in the family food chain, somewhere below Nathan's law degree and slightly above the good silverware. But that quiet little answer had been building for weeks. Starting on the morning my grandmother died. Grandma Margaret passed away on a Tuesday in September at Providence Medical Center in Portland. She was 87. I got the call from my mother at 6:14 inches the morning. I remember the exact time because I was already awake. Sitting at my tiny kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside my laptop. I had been working on a rain garden design for a client in Lake Oswego, trying to make a drainage problem look expensive and intentional. That was basically half my job. My phone buzzed. And when I saw Mom's name, I knew. Nobody calls at 6:14 inches the morning with fun news. Nobody says, "Good morning. Surprise. We won a boat," I answered. And for a second all I heard was breathing. Claire, my mother said. Her voice sounded thin, tired, like she had been holding herself together with tape. What happened? It's your grandmother, she said. She's gone. I sat there with my hand around the coffee mug, staring at the steam that had already disappeared. I knew Grandma had been sick. We all knew. But knowing something is coming does not make it polite when it finally kicks down the door. I'm coming, I said. I changed clothes without really thinking, grabbed my keys, and drove through the morning rain. Portland had that gray, wet look it gets when the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or just make everyone miserable on principle. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. When I got to the hospital, my father and Nathan were already in the hallway outside her room. That should have been comforting, I guess. Family gathered together, shared grief. All that nice brochure language hospitals probably put on pamphlets. But they weren't grieving. Dad was on his phone, standing straight in his dark coat, speaking in that low-controlled voice he used when he wanted people to know he was important but not emotional. Nathan stood beside him in a suit, because apparently death in our family still required business attire. I heard my father say, "Probate timeline." Then filing requirements. Then asset management. My grandmother had been dead for maybe an hour, and they were already talking like she had missed a board meeting. Dad saw me and ended the call without saying goodbye. Claire, he said. Not honey. Not sweetheart. Not I'm sorry. Just my name. Flat and official. Like I was checking in for jury duty. Where's Mom? I asked. In the room. I went in. My mother was sitting beside the bed, holding Grandma's hand. She looked smaller than usual, folded in on herself. Grandma Margaret looked peaceful, which made me angry for reasons I couldn't explain. Her hair had been brushed back. Her hands rested on the blanket. Those hands had taught me how to plant peonies, how to hem a curtain, How to make tea strong enough to solve a small personal crisis. I touched her arm, and it was already cool. The last time I had seen her awake, she had grabbed my hand with surprising strength. She had looked toward the door, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then whispered, "Claire, I took care of things. You trust me, all right?" I had nodded. Because what else do you do when someone you love is sick and serious and looking at you like the words matter? I didn't understand then. I wish I had asked more. I wish I had asked what she meant. But grief gives you a long list of things you should have said. And it never lets you edit the scene. The funeral was 3 days later. The church was old stone. Cold, even with all those people packed inside. White lilies everywhere. Too many. Honestly, the whole place smelled like flowers, candles, and relatives pretending they had always visited more than they actually had. My father gave the eulogy. Of course he did. Edward Whitmore could find a podium in a power outage. He stood at the front of the church in a black suit, one hand resting on the lectern. Voice steady, eyes dry. He spoke about the Whitmore legacy. He spoke about duty. He spoke about tradition. He spoke about how families are built by strong leadership and responsible stewardship. He mentioned Nathan 4 times. Nathan will carry forward the values my mother believed in. Nathan understands responsibility. Nathan has always respected the importance of family history. I sat in the second row, listening to my grandmother's funeral slowly turn into my brother's campaign announcement. My name came once, near the end, and Claire, of course, brought creativity into Mother's life. Creativity, that was the family safe word for, we don't know what she does. But it involves plants and unpaid invoices. A few people smiled politely. Nathan lowered his eyes like he was embarrassed by all the praise, which was impressive, considering he had never been embarrassed by praise in his life. After the service, people hugged me and said the usual things. She was a wonderful woman. She loved you so much. She's in a better place. I nodded and thanked them because apparently even grief has customer service rules. Then, near the back of the church, an older man I didn't recognize stepped in front of me. He had silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a brown leather briefcase that looked older than Nathan's personality. He took my hand gently. "Claire Whitmore," he said. "Yes? Your grandmother was very proud of you." Something in my chest tightened. "Thank you," I said. "Did you know her well?" His eyes moved briefly toward my father across the room. "For many years." Before I could ask anything else, Aunt Caroline touched my elbow. And when I looked back, the man was gone. I didn't know his name yet. Later, I would learn he was Arthur Bennett, Grandma Margaret's attorney. At that moment, he was just a stranger who had said the one thing my father had managed not to say all day. That evening, we gathered at the Whitmore house, the old white colonial on Hawthorne Street, my grandmother's house. Though Dad had always acted like the deed had his name on it just because his ego lived there rent-free. The dining table was set with the good china. The silver had been polished. Someone opened expensive wine. It looked like a family coming together to mourn. It was not. Dad sat at the head of the table and announced, "Mother left her affairs for me to manage. I'll make sure everything is handled appropriately." Appropriately meant whatever benefited Nathan, and made me look immature for noticing. I started to say, "Grandma told me." Dad cut me off. "Your grandmother was confused near the end." My fork stopped halfway to my plate. "She was not confused," I said. He looked at me with that warning expression. The one that said, "Not here. Not now. Not ever." After dinner, I went upstairs to my old bedroom because I needed 5 minutes without hearing people discuss my grandmother's life like an estate spreadsheet. The room looked almost the same. Twin bed. Old desk. A faded architecture poster still taped to the wall. I opened the nightstand drawer out of habit. Inside was an envelope. Cream-colored paper. My name written across the front in Grandma Margaret's shaky blue handwriting. Claire. My hands started trembling before I even opened it. Inside were two things: a handwritten letter and a photocopy of a legal document. The top of the photocopy read, Irrevocable Trust Agreement. Margaret A. Whitmore. Settlor. Halfway down the page, one line had been highlighted in yellow. Beneficiary, Claire Whitmore. I sat on the edge of that old twin bed and read Grandma's letter with tears running down my face. Claire, if you are reading this, then I'm gone. And your father is already doing what I was afraid he would do. I am sorry I could not stop him while I was alive. I tried in the ways I could. But men like Edward do not hear women. They hear paperwork. The original trust is with my attorney, Arthur Bennett, in Portland. Do not show this to your father. Do not show Nathan. Do not even show your mother yet. I love Helen, but she is afraid of Edward. And fear makes people careless. Wait until the right time. Arthur will know what to do. You were always my builder. Claire. You make life grow in places other people give up on. Do not let them convince you that you are small. All my love. Grandma. I folded the letter slowly and pressed it against my chest. For the first time since she died, I did not feel only grief. I felt protected. Not loudly. Not magically. No choir came through the ceiling. The wallpaper did not glow. This was still my childhood bedroom. And downstairs my father was still talking like he owned the air. But Grandma had left me proof, and somewhere in Portland, a lawyer named Arthur Bennett was holding the rest of it. I kept that letter under my coat the whole drive back to Portland. Not in my purse. Not in the glove compartment. Not on the passenger seat where one hard break could send it sliding under a floor mat and make me lose my mind in traffic. I tucked it inside my coat like it had a pulse. Like if I let go of it, the whole thing might disappear, and I'd be left with nothing but my father's voice in my head, telling me I had misunderstood everything. That was the part nobody saw from the outside. People thought I was quiet because I was weak. That was easy for them. Clean. Convenient. But the truth was, I had been trained to doubt myself before I ever got the chance to defend myself. My father had a way of correcting reality around him. If I remembered something one way, he remembered it louder. If I said he hurt my feelings, he said I was too sensitive. If I pointed out something unfair, he said I was jealous of Nathan. If I asked a direct question, he acted like I had just thrown a chair through a window. So even with Grandma Margaret's letter sitting right there beside me, even with her handwriting on the envelope, even with the words beneficiary, Claire Whitmore highlighted on that photocopy, I still had a tiny, poisonous voice in the back of my mind whispering, what if you're wrong? What if Grandma really had been confused? What if the document was old? What if there was another version? What if Dad was right and you just didn't understand complicated things? I hated that voice. I hated that it sounded a lot like him. My apartment was only 480 square feet, which sounds small because it was. The kitchen was basically a hallway with a sink. My living room was also my office, my dining room, and depending on how late I worked, sometimes my emotional support cave. Plants crowded every windowsill. Rolled blueprints leaned in the corner. My drafting table sat under the biggest window, covered in tracing paper, pencils, soil samples, invoices, and one mug of tea I had abandoned 2 days earlier. Very glamorous. Very single woman quietly fighting generational nonsense. I locked the door behind me, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of that tiny room, holding the envelope. For a few minutes, I did nothing. Then I read the letter again. Then I read it a third time. Then I opened my laptop and searched Arthur Bennett, Attorney, Portland. His website came up immediately. Small firm. Estate planning. Trusts. Probate. A professional headshot showed the same silver-haired man from the funeral. The one who had said Grandma was proud of me. The one who had looked toward my father before disappearing into the crowd. I hovered over the phone number. My finger was right there. One click and I could call. One click and I could find out if Grandma's letter meant something real. Or if I was about to hand my father another reason to call me dramatic. I closed the laptop. Brave. I know. Truly inspiring. Put it on a mug, but I wasn't ready. Not that day. Instead, I did what I always did when my life felt too big for my body. I worked. A landscape architecture firm in the Pearl District had hired me as a contract designer for a rooftop garden project. The client wanted native plants, built-in seating, stormwater management, and a peaceful urban escape, which was rich coming from a developer who had spent the last year removing every peaceful thing from that block. But the check was real. And my student loan company did not accept moral objections as payment, so I buried myself in the project. For the next 3 weeks, I measured, drafted, revised, argued with suppliers, answered emails, and pretended I was not thinking about the envelope hidden in the back of my closet. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself I needed time. I told myself calling Arthur Bennett could wait until after the deadline. Really. I was scared. Not of the law. Not even of my father. Exactly. I was scared of hope. Hope is dangerous when you grow up in a family that punishes you for wanting anything. You learn to keep your expectations low. Because disappointment hurts less when you saw it coming. Grandma's letter had done something I was not prepared for. It had made me believe, just a little, that maybe someone in my family had seen the truth all along, and I was terrified to find out I had imagined it. Then Nathan made his first mistake. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was at my drafting table, eating pretzels for lunch because adulthood is mostly just making bad choices without supervision. When my laptop pinged, an email from Nathan. That alone was strange. Nathan did not email me unless there was a family schedule. A legal document he wanted me to sign without reading. Or a group message where he could sound generous in front of other people. The subject line read, Trust Amendment Draft Petition. My stomach dropped so fast, I actually put the pretzel down. I clicked it. At first, I thought he had meant to send me something else. Maybe a blank reply. Maybe some family nonsense. But then I saw the chain beneath his message. 7 emails. Nathan to Dad. Dad to Nathan. Back and forth over 2 weeks. I read the first paragraph. And the room seemed to go very still. Nathan had drafted a petition for my father to file with the court. The purpose was to amend Grandma Margaret's irrevocable trust and change the beneficiary from me to Nathan. I stopped breathing for a second. Not in a poetic way. In a real way. My chest locked up. And I had to remind myself like an idiot. Inhale. Claire. Great job. Basic human function. The petition claimed I was financially incompetent. It said I had a pattern of unstable career choices. It mentioned that I had left law school after 1 year. It mentioned my student loans. It mentioned that I rented a small apartment and had no significant assets. It described my design work as inconsistent freelance employment. They had turned my entire life into a legal insult. And the worst part was how clean it sounded. That was Nathan's talent. He could write something cruel and make it look professional. My father could humiliate you in a room full of people. Nathan could do it in 12-point Times New Roman with proper citations. I kept scrolling. Dad had asked whether the court would require my consent. Nathan replied that because the trust was irrevocable, changing the beneficiary would be difficult without consent. Unless they could argue I was not capable of managing the funds responsibly, Dad wrote, "She doesn't need to know until it's settled." Nathan replied, "We can say we made reasonable efforts to locate her." I actually laughed when I read that. One sharp, ugly little laugh. Reasonable efforts. My father had my phone number, my address, my email. My mother called me every Sunday to ask if I was eating enough. As if I were living in the wilderness. Instead of 15 minutes from a Trader Joe's, they knew exactly where I was. Then I reached the last message. Nathan had written it late at night. Just one casual line after a paragraph of legal strategy. She won't fight it. She never fights anything. That's the beauty of it. Dad, I stared at those words. Not for a few seconds. For a long time. She won't fight it. She never fights anything. That's the beauty of it. There are moments when someone says what they really think of you. And it does not break your heart. It clears your vision. That line did not make me cry. It made me still. Because suddenly I understood. My silence had not protected me. It had trained them. Every insult I swallowed. Every holiday I survived. Every time I let my father rewrite reality, just to keep the peace. They had counted it as proof that I would never push back. They were not just stealing from me. They were betting on who they thought I was. And for the first time in my life, I wanted them to lose that bet. My hands were shaking when I started taking screenshots. Every email. Every timestamp. Every sender address. I downloaded the full thread. I saved it to my laptop. Then I saved it to the cloud. Then I copied it to a thumb drive I kept in my desk drawer. Then, because paranoia is sometimes just common sense, wearing work boots, I forwarded it to a new email account my family did not know existed. I did not reply to Nathan. I did not call my father. I did not call my mother and ask what she knew. The old Claire would have wanted an explanation. The old Claire would have given them a warning. A chance to deny it. A chance to make me feel crazy again. Not this time. That night, my mother called. "Your father wants everyone home for Thanksgiving," she said. Her voice had that careful tone she used when she was delivering one of Dad's orders, but trying to wrap it in tissue paper first. "He says it would be good for the family," she added. "After your grandmother." I looked at the printed email chain spread across my table. Good for the family. That phrase should come with a warning label. "What does Dad want?" I asked. "He wants to mend things." I almost laughed again. My father did not mend things. He broke them. Named himself the victim, and waited for everyone else to clean up the pieces. But as I sat there looking at Nathan's words, something settled inside me. "She won't fight it. Fina. Let them think that. Tell him I'll be there," I said. My mother sounded relieved. "Really? Really?" When we hung up, I opened Arthur Bennett's website again. This time, I did not close the laptop. This time, I copied his number into my phone. And the next morning, I made the call. The call button sat under my thumb for almost a full minute. That sounds ridiculous. I know. It was just a phone number. Then digits. Not a grenada. Not a confession. Not a marriage proposal in front of a stadium full of people. But that number felt like the line between who I had been and who I was about to become. Arthur Bennett. Attorney at law. Estate planning. Trusts. Probate. I had spent my whole life being told that those words belonged to people like my father and Nathan. Men in suites? Men who knew which papers mattered and which signatures could ruin you. Men who could say fiduciary duty at a dinner table and still somehow believe they were interesting. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who played with dirt. That was the joke. Right? Claire did plant. Claire did pretty little gardens. Claire did not understand legal documents. Claire did not understand money. Claire did not understand the family. Claire definitely did not understand power. Except I understood one thing very clearly. If someone is trying to take something from you in writing, you better learn to answer in writing too. So, before I called Arthur Bennett, I got organized. Not emotionally. Let's not get crazy. Emotionally. I was somewhere between shaking rage and the kind of calm that makes you wonder if you should drink water. But practically, I moved like someone had flipped a switch. I opened Nathan's email thread again. I read every message from top to bottom. No skimming. No guessing. I made notes on a legal pad because apparently betrayal feels more official when you write it down in blue ink. There were 7 messages total. 2 from my father. 5 from Nathan. They discussed the trust amendment petition. The argument they wanted to make. and how to present me as financially unstable without using words that sounded openly cruel. Very considerate of them. Nothing says family love like polishing the knife before you use it. Nathan had written that I had a demonstrated pattern of non-traditional employment. That was a fancy way of saying I did not work in a courtroom and therefore must be wandering the streets barefoot, eating leaves. He mentioned my student loans. He mentioned that I had left law school. He mentioned my apartment. He mentioned my lack of substantial assets. He even referred to my career as aesthetic contract work, which was impressive because he made landscape design sound like I was gluing seashells to picture frames in an alley. I took screenshots of every email. Then I took screenshots of the headers. Then I downloaded the full email thread as a PDF. Then I saved the PDF to my laptop. Then I saved it to my cloud drive. Then I saved it to a second cloud folder under a boring name, Rooftop Irrigation Notes. If my family ever hacked into my files looking for evidence, they would have to suffer through landscape architecture terminology first. Honestly. Fair. Then I copied everything onto a USB drive. I put that drive into an old Altoids tin in my sock drawer. Very spy movie. If spy movies had more laundry and cheaper furniture, after that, I went to the FedEx store 3 blocks away and printed the entire thread. I printed Grandma Margaret's letter too. I printed the partial trust copy. I bought a plain manila folder and a pack of binder clips from the little office supply section near the counter. The guy working there asked if I needed a receipt. I said yes. For once, I wanted receipts for everything. When I got home, I laid the papers across my kitchen table. My apartment was too small for drama, so the whole operation barely fit between my laptop and a bowl of apples. I kept forgetting to eat. But looking at those pages spread out in front of me, I felt something shift. For years, my father had controlled the room because he controlled the story. He said I was too sensitive. And people believed him. He said Nathan was responsible. And people believed him. He said my choices were unstable. My work was childish. My questions were disrespectful. And my silence meant agreement. But paper was different. Paper did not flinch because Edward Whitmore raised his voice. Paper did not look down like my mother. Paper did not laugh along because the joke was easier than the truth. Paper just sat there and stayed what it was. Evidence. That evening, my mother called. I watched her name light up on my phone. And for a few seconds, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I loved my mother. But every call from her came with invisible strings tied to my father's mood. If Dad was angry, she sounded nervous. If Dad wanted something, she sounded gentle. If Dad had made a decision, she called it, what we think is best. I answered, hey, Mom, Claire, she said. And I could hear it right away. That careful voice, soft around the edges, practiced. Your father wants everyone together for Thanksgiving this year. I looked down at Nathan's printed email. The words "she won't fight it" were highlighted in yellow because apparently I enjoy hurting my own feelings with office supplies. Does he? I said. He thinks it would be good for the family, she said. After losing your grandmother. There it was again. Good for the family. In my family, that phrase usually meant good for Edward. Convenient for Nathan. Uncomfortable for everyone else. And somehow my fault. Mom kept going. He says it's time to mend things. I almost asked. What things? The things he broke? The things he denied breaking? The things he handed to you and expected you to hide under a tablecloth? But I didn't. Because for once, I did not need her to understand before I acted. What kind of gathering? I asked. Dinner on Thanksgiving. Of course. And he wants everyone to stay through Friday morning. He said there are some family matters to discuss. Family matters. That was new. My father did not gather 30 relatives for turkey and emotional growth. He gathered audiences. He liked witnesses when he wanted to win. He liked rooms full of people when he wanted someone else to feel small. And now he wanted the whole family present the same week he and Nathan had been drafting a petition to erase me from Grandma's trust. It was not reconciliation. It was theater. And apparently, I had been cast as the ungrateful daughter who would be publicly corrected in Act 3. "Claire?" Mom said. "Are you there?" "I'm here. I know things have been tense," she said. "But maybe if you come home and just keep things peaceful, your father will calm down." Keep things peaceful. I stared at that phrase in my head, like it was a bug on the wall. Peaceful had never meant safe in our family. Peaceful meant Edward got what he wanted without resistance. Peaceful meant Nathan got praised. Peaceful meant Mom smiled through dinner. Peaceful meant I swallowed whatever was handed to me, and thanked everybody for the opportunity to choke quietly. I looked at the folder on my table. "Tell Dad I'll be there," I said. Mom went silent for a moment. "Really?" "Yes." "Oh?" she said. And I could hear the relief. "That's good. Honey. That's really good. I think this could help." I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost. I'll drive down Wednesday," I said. "He'll be glad." "No." He wouldn't. He would be satisfied. There's a difference. We hung up. And I sat there for a long time with the phone in my hand. I wasn't going home to mend anything. I was going home to listen. To watch. To let Edward Whitmore stand in the middle of his perfect living room, in front of his perfect audience, and tell whatever story he had prepared. And then I was going to answer with paper. The next morning, I made the call. Arthur Bennett's office opened at 9. I called at 9:02 because I did not want to seem desperate. Which was hilarious considering I had spent the previous night organizing betrayal into labeled stacks like a very tired paralegal. A woman answered on the second ring. "Arthur Bennett's office." "Hi," I said. My mouth had gone dry. "My name is Claire Whitmore. I believe Mr. Bennett handled some documents for my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore." There was a pause. Not a confused pause, a recognition pause. Then the woman's voice changed. It became warmer. "Careful, Miss Whitmore," she said. "Mr. Bennett has been expecting your call." I closed my eyes. For 3 weeks. I had been afraid the letter might lead nowhere. That I would call and be told there was no trust. No plan. No protection. No proof. Just another sad misunderstanding I had built into hope because I wanted my grandmother back. But he had been expecting me. Those 5 words did more for me than any hug I had received since the funeral. "Can you come in today?" she asked. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table. The printed emails. The copied letter. The partial trust document. My whole life suddenly reduced to pages and proof. "Yes," I said. "I can come in today. Mr. Bennett has an opening at 11:30. I'll be there." After I hung up, I stood in the middle of my apartment and took one slow breath. Nothing had been fixed. Not yet. My father still thought he was in control. Nathan still thought I would fold. My mother still thought Thanksgiving could be saved with politeness and cranberry sauce. But something was different now. I was not walking into that house empty-handed. And I was done being the quiet daughter they mistook for an easy target. At 11:20, I parked across the street from Arthur Bennett's office and sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel. His office was on Northwest 23rd Avenue, tucked between a small stationery shop and a cafe where people paid $7 for coffee and acted like that was normal. The building was old brick. 3 stories. With black-framed windows and a brass directory by the front door. Nothing flashy. No glass tower. No marble lobby. No receptionist who looked like she had been designed by a luxury hotel. That made me trust it a little more. My father liked impressive rooms. High ceilings. Heavy desks. Walls full of framed degrees. Places where people walked in and immediately understood who had the power. Arthur Bennett's office looked like a place where people came when the truth mattered more than the furniture. I had the manila folder on my lap. Inside were Grandma Margaret's letter, the partial trust copy, Nathan's email chain, And the screenshots I had printed until my cheap little printer gave me a look like it wanted workers' compensation. I checked the folder again, even though I already knew everything was there. Then I checked the time. 11:27. I got out of the car before I could talk myself into needing 3 more minutes. The receptionist was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the calm expression of someone who had seen generations of families behave badly over money. She looked up as soon as I walked in. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes." "Mr. Bennett is ready for you." No waiting. No forms. No pretending this was a normal consultation about a distant aunt's china cabinet. She led me down a narrow hallway, lined with framed black and white photographs of old Portland buildings. At the end, she opened a door. Arthur Bennett stood behind his desk. He was exactly as I remembered from the funeral. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, dark suit, brown leather briefcase on a side table. He looked gentle, but not soft. There was a difference. Gentle people can still ruin a liar's day with the right document. "Claire," he said. "Not Miss Whitmore. Not Victoria." Like my father used when he wanted to sound formal and annoyed. "Just Claire." He came around the desk and shook my hand with both of his. "I'm very sorry about your grandmother." "Thank you," I said. "She loved you deeply." That sentence almost knocked the air out of me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was plain. No performance. No agenda. Just the truth. Delivered by a man who had no reason to flatter me. I sat across from him in a leather chair that had probably been there since the Clinton administration. His office smelled like paper, coffee, and old wood. Bookshelves covered 2 walls, packed with legal volumes and labeled binders. On his desk, everything was arranged in clean stacks. Up in a yellow legal pad, a closed file with my grandmother's name on the tab, Margaret E. Whitmore. Seeing her name there made my throat tighten. Arthur noticed. But he did not rush me. He just sat down, folded his hands, and said, "Your grandmother instructed me to wait for your call." I looked up. "She knew I would call?" "She hoped you would. She also knew it might take you some time." That sounded like Grandma. Loving me without pushing. Planning for me without making me feel stupid for being scared. I should have called sooner. I said, "No." Arthur said, "You called when you were ready?" "That matters." I placed my folder on the desk. "I found her letter. And the partial trust copy." He nodded. "Good. She left that for you herself." I advised her not to leave any original documents in the house. Especially not where your father might find them. That got my attention. "So she knew he might look?" Arthur's expression did not change. But his eyes sharpened. "Your grandmother knew her son very well." There it was. Quiet. Controlled. Devastating. He opened the file in front of him and pulled out a thick document printed on cream-colored paper. There was a red notary seal near the bottom of the first page. Several colored tabs marked different sections. "This," he said, turning it toward me, "is the original irrevocable trust agreement executed by Margaret Eleanor Whitmore 8 years ago." I stared at the page. The words looked official in a way my photocopy had not. The paper had weight. The seal had texture. Grandma's signature was there in blue ink. Careful and steady. Arthur tapped one section with his finger. "Your grandmother created this trust for one named beneficiary. You." I heard the words, but my brain took an extra second to accept them. "Only me?" "Only you. Not Nathan. Not my father. Not some vague family pool that Edward could manage from his throne in the living room. Me." Arthur continued. Steady and clear. "The trust corpus includes $620,000 held through U.S. Bank in an education and support trust account. It was originally funded by assets your grandmother inherited from her mother. Your father did not contribute to it." I let out a breath. I did not know I had been holding $620,000. That number did not feel real. My checking account usually started sending smoke signals if I bought groceries and paid rent in the same week. 620,000 sounded like Monopoly money. Except, apparently, nobody was laughing. Arthur turned another page. The trust also includes a small cedar cottage in Cannon Beach. I blinked. The cottage? Yes. Grandma's cottage. The place she took me every summer when I was little. The one with the wraparound porch. The sand stuck permanently in the floorboards. And the tiny kitchen where she taught me to make pancakes without burning one side into roofing material. She left that to me? She placed it inside the trust. Arthur said. So yes. Upon her death, the property transfers to the beneficiary. I sat back in the chair. My grandmother had not just remembered me. She had planned for me. Arthur watched me for a moment, then reached for another folder. There is more. Of course there was. Because apparently Grandma Margaret had been playing legal chess, while the rest of us were still arguing over who brought cranberry sauce. He slid a deed across the desk. I looked at it. Then back at him. The Hawthorne Street house? I asked. Arthur nodded. I actually laughed once. Because my brain refused to process it any other way. No. That's Dad's house. No. Arthur said. It is not. He said it so simply that it landed harder than if he had raised his voice. The Hawthorne Street property was purchased by your grandmother in 1980, won with money from her side of the family. The deed remained solely in her name. Your father lived there. He managed expenses at times. But he never owned it. I stared at the deed. That house had been the center of my father's authority my entire life. He sat at the head of the dining table like he had built the foundation with his bare hands. He made rules in that house. He delivered judgments in that house. He sent me upstairs in that house like I was still a child, and it had never belonged to him. Arthur tapped the document gently. Under the trust terms, ownership transfers to you after Margaret's death. My mouth went dry. Does he know? Arthur removed his glasses, cleaned them once with a cloth, and put them back on. I believe your father knows there is a trust. I do not believe he has read the full document carefully. Your grandmother suspected he would focus on the section naming him trustee and ignore the limitations on that role. That was so perfectly Edward Whitmore. I almost smiled. My father saw the word trustee and probably stopped reading because he had found the only word he cared about. Control. Arthur leaned forward slightly. Claire. Your father was appointed administrative trustee. That means he had a duty to manage the trust according to its terms. It did not give him ownership of the funds. It did not give him the right to change the beneficiary. It did not allow him to transfer assets to your brother. It did not allow him to hide the trust from you. I nodded slowly. He told the family Grandma left everything for him to manage. In a very limited sense? That was true, Arthur said. But limited truth is often the cleanest way to tell a lie. I liked Arthur Bennett more every minute. I opened my own folder and slid the printed email chain across the desk. Nathan sent this to me by accident. Arthur took it without a word. He read carefully. No gasping. No dramatic eyebrow raise. Just page after page. His expression getting colder. When he reached the highlighted line, he stopped. She won't fight it. She never fights anything. He looked up. This is useful, he said. Useful. Not heartbreaking. Not outrageous. Useful. For the first time. That word felt comforting. Can they do what they're trying to do? I asked. No, Arthur said. Not legally. An irrevocable trust cannot simply be changed because the trustee prefers a different beneficiary. They would need your written consent or a court order based on serious evidence, such as fraud, incapacity at signing, or legal defects in the trust. They're saying Grandma was confused. I expected that. He opened another file and removed a medical evaluation. Your grandmother expected it too. The document had a physician's letterhead at the top. Dr. Helen Morris. Cognitive evaluation. Date stamped the same week. Grandma signed the trust. Margaret asked her doctor to evaluate her capacity before signing. Arthur said, "She passed clearly." The doctor wrote that she was alert, oriented, understood her assets, understood the legal consequences of the trust, and was acting voluntarily. I stared at the paper. Grandma had known exactly what Edward would say, and she had answered him 8 years early. Arthur placed the evaluation beside the trust document, then set the email chain next to it. "You have the trust. You have the bank records. You have the deed. You have the medical capacity evaluation. And now, thanks to your brother's mistake, you have evidence of intent. Intent? Evidence that your father and brother knew there was a legal obstacle and tried to work around it by misrepresenting you." I looked at the papers spread across his desk. For weeks, I had felt like I was carrying a secret too heavy for me. Now it looked different. It looked like a case. "What happens now?" I asked. Arthur folded his hands. "That depends on what you want. We can move quietly. I can contact your father and demand compliance. We can file with the court immediately. Or we can wait until he takes the next step and let him expose himself further." I thought about Thanksgiving, the invitation, the big family gathering, my father's need for an audience, Nathan's confidence, my mother telling me he wanted to mend things. Then I thought about the way my father had spent my whole life making me small in public. I looked at Arthur. "He wants everyone home for Thanksgiving," I said. "He said there are family matters to discuss." Arthur understood before I finished. His face stayed calm, but something in his eyes changed. "You believe he intends to present his version in front of the family?" "I know he does." Arthur sat back. "Then we should be ready." For the first time since Grandma died, I felt the ground under my feet. Not because I had money, not because I had a house, because I had proof, real proof. Signed, sealed, witnessed, filed, and backed by a woman who loved me enough to think farther ahead than the people trying to erase me. Arthur closed the file gently. "Your grandmother protected you, Claire," he said. "Now we make sure her wishes are honored." I picked up the manila folder and held it against my chest. My father had spent years teaching me that documents belonged to people like him. He was about to learn. Grandma had left the most important ones to me. I drove back to the Whitmore house with Arthur Bennett's words still sitting in my head like a loaded file box. "Your grandmother protected you." That sentence changed the shape of the road in front of me. I was not driving home as Edward Whitmore's disappointing daughter anymore. I was driving there with notarized copies in my bag, a lawyer on standby, and enough proof to make my father's perfect little performance collapse in front of the audience he had invited himself. Still, when the old white colonial appeared at the end of Hawthorne Street, my stomach tightened. That house had a talent for making me feel 16 again. The iron gate, the wide porch, the tall windows, the oak tree in the front yard that had been there longer than every argument inside those walls. From the sidewalk, it looked like the kind of home people point at and say, "Now that's a good family." That was the trick. From the outside, we always looked better. I parked my Honda at the curb behind Nathan's shiny black SUV. My car had one dent in the rear bumper, a cracked cup holder, and a check engine light that liked to appear whenever my life was already stressful. Nathan's SUV looked like it had never experienced a parking lot or a bad decision. I grabbed my overnight bag and the canvas tote with my folder inside. The originals stayed with Arthur, locked in his office safe. I had copies. Clean, stamped, organized copies. The kind my father could not dismiss as Claire being emotional, which had been his favorite legal theory for most of my life. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Claire?" she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted 1 second too long. That was how my mother apologized without using words. She hugged too long. She touched your arm. She offered tea. She never actually said, "I'm sorry your father treats you like a defective appliance." But she did ask if you wanted honey in your cup. You made it, she said. I did. She looked over my shoulder at my car. Was the drive okay? Fine. Your father's in the study. Of course he was. The study was Edward Whitmore's throne room. Dark wood shelves. Leather chair. Framed legal certificates. Photographs of him shaking hands with other serious men in serious suits. It was where he paid bills, made calls, and summoned people when he wanted to make disappointment feel official. Before I could say anything, my father appeared in the hallway. He looked me over once. Not warmly. More like a building inspector deciding whether to condemn a shed. Claire, he said. Dad. No hug. No, good to see you. No mention of Grandma. Just that little nod of acknowledgement he gave to people he considered inconvenient but technically related. You're late. I glanced at my phone. I'm 10 minutes early. He ignored that, because facts were never his favorite when they were not useful. Nathan and Vanessa are already here? Naturally. The prince and his pearl-wearing witness had arrived ahead of schedule. I carried my bag upstairs to my old room. Same twin bed. Same faded poster. Same narrow closet. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and old carpet. For a moment, I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, remembering Grandma Margaret's envelope in the nightstand drawer. That room had been the first place I learned the truth. It would not be the last. I slid the folder under the mattress. Not because I thought that was the safest place in the world. Because no one in that house had ever cared enough about my room to look under anything. Downstairs. Nathan's laugh floated from the living room. Smooth. Confident. Just loud enough to remind people he belonged there. I walked in and found him on the sofa beside Vanessa. One ankle resting on his knee. Wineglass in hand. Looking like he had been born in that exact pose. Well? He said, smiling at me. You came? Looks that way. His eyes moved to the window. Still driving the Civic? Still running. That's good. He said. Reliable. Practical. Very you. Vanessa gave me a bright smile. I think it's nice when people don't get caught up in appearances. That was rich coming from a woman wearing earrings that probably required insurance. I smiled back. Me too. Nathan swirled his wine. How's work? Still doing garden sketches? Landscape design. Right. Same thing. There it was. The little poke. The casual dismissal. Nathan never threw punches when a needle would do. He had learned from Dad. But he had added his own polish. Edward hit you with authority. Nathan hit you with a smile, and made other people wonder if you were overreacting. I sat in the armchair near the window. Not the good chair. That one was Dad's. Even when he was not sitting in it, everybody knew that. Nobody said it. Families have a lot of rules like that. Invisible. Stupid. And enforced harder than actual laws. For the rest of the evening, the house ran on old patterns. Dad sat in the leather chair by the fireplace, talking about judges he knew, and cases Nathan had won. Nathan offered modest little corrections that somehow made him sound even more impressive. Vanessa laughed at the right moments. Mom moved in and out of the kitchen with trays, plates, napkins, and that anxious hostess smile women develop when they have spent years managing a man's mood, like it might explode near the good china. I helped in the kitchen because standing still felt worse. Mom handed me celery to chop for the stuffing. Your father really wants this to go well, she said. I kept the knife moving. Does he? He's trying. I looked at her. She did not look back. There was a time when that sentence would have made me soften. He's trying. I had heard it my whole life. After he insulted my work, after he skipped my college graduation party because Nathan had a networking dinner, after he called my apartment temporary housing for bad choices, he's trying. Trying what? Exactly? Trying to become worse at a manageable pace? I did not say that. Growth is important. but so is not ruining stuffing. Sure, I said. Thanksgiving morning started early and loud. But then, cars lined both sides of Hawthorne Street. Aunt Caroline came in with 2 pies and a look that missed nothing. Uncle Rob brought wine and immediately asked where the corkscrew was, which told you everything about his priorities. Cousins filled the living room. Kids ran through the hallway. Someone's toddler tried to feed mashed potatoes to a decorative ceramic turkey. By noon, there were 32 people in the house. The Whitmore family had gathered. And my father was glowing, not with warmth, with control. He moved through the rooms, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, accepting compliments on a house he did not legally own. That detail sat in the back of my mind all day like a private joke. Every time he said, "my house," I had to bite the inside of my cheek. At 4, we sat down to dinner. The main table seated 18. The overflow table was set up in the living room, near the window, with a folding tablecloth and mismatched chairs from the basement. Guess where I was placed? If you guessed beside my 9-year-old cousin and a stack of extra napkins, congratulations. You understand family hierarchy. Nathan sat at the main table near Dad. Vanessa beside him. Mom, at the other end, ready to jump up if anyone needed more gravy. I sat at the folding table with the children. 2 teenagers. And Uncle Rob, who had already lost one argument with a bottle opener. Dad stood at the head of the main table and tapped his glass. The room quieted. This year has been difficult, he began, using the voice, the judicial voice, the one that made people sit straighter, even when they hated themselves for it. We lost my mother, Margaret, a woman who understood duty, family, and legacy. I watched his face as he said her name. Nothing, no grief, no softness, just performance. But the Whitmore family continues, he said. And I am especially proud of my son, Nathan, who has had an exceptional year professionally. Here we go. I thought. Everybody buckle up. The Nathan parade has entered the dining room. Dad lifted his glass. Nathan recently handled one of the most significant cases of his career. He has shown the kind of discipline and judgment this family values. People applauded. Nathan lowered his head, pretending humility so hard, I was surprised he did not sprain something. Vanessa touched his arm. Mom smiled. A few cousins clapped like they were at an awards dinner instead of Thanksgiving with dry turkey. Aunt Caroline's voice cut through from the main table. What about Claire? She asked. Any good news from you, sweetheart? For half a second, I actually appreciated her. Then my father answered for me. Claire is still finding her way? He said. There were a few polite chuckles. She's creative, he added, like he was awarding me a sticker. We give her that. Every family needs someone willing to take the scenic route. More laughter. Nathan smiled into his wineglass. I looked down at my plate. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans. A dinner arranged like a normal family meal, while my father used me as dessert. I could have corrected him. I could have said I had just finished a major rooftop garden project. I could have said I had 3 new clients lined up. I could have said Grandma had trusted me with more than any of them knew. But that was not the moment. Not yet. So I smiled faintly and reached for my water. The meal dragged on. Plates filled. Emptied. Refilled. People talked over each other. The kids got restless. Uncle Rob told the same fishing story for the 3rd year in a row and still somehow forgot the ending. After dessert, when the pumpkin pie had been reduced to crumbs and the wine had made everyone a little too comfortable, my father stood again. This time, the room quieted faster. He liked that. I saw it on his face. That small satisfaction. The power of making people wait. One more thing, he said. Tomorrow morning, I'll be making an important family announcement regarding my mother's estate. My fork stopped against the plate. Nathan looked down. Vanessa adjusted her bracelet. Mom went completely still. Dad continued. Given the importance of family transparency, I believe it is best that everyone be present. There has been some confusion, and I want to make sure matters are understood clearly. Family transparency. That almost made me laugh out loud. This man had spent weeks hiding a trust, lying to a court, and planning to rewrite a dead woman's wishes. And now he was selling it as transparency. If hypocrisy burned calories, my father would have been in Olympic shape. He looked across the room until his eyes found mine at the folding table. I expect everyone to be here, he said. There it was. Not an announcement, a warning. He was going to stand in front of the whole family and read his version of Grandma Margaret's estate. He was going to make it sound official. He was going to make Nathan look responsible, me look unstable, and himself look noble. And he was going to do it with witnesses. That was the part that made my pulse steady instead of fast. Because witnesses worked both ways. I looked at him, then at Nathan, then at my mother staring down into her coffee. I understood the plan now. Edward Whitmore had built himself a stage. He just had no idea I had brought the ending. The dishes were still warm when Nathan followed me into the kitchen. I was standing at the sink with my sleeves pushed up, scrubbing a roasting pan that had clearly seen better choices. The rest of the family was in the living room with their coffee, and very strong opinions about people who were not present. Nobody had offered to help clean up. That was normal. In the Whitmore house, I had somehow been promoted from disappointing daughter to unpaid seasonal staff. Nathan leaned against the doorframe with a glass of wine in one hand. You know, he said, you really should thank Dad. I kept scrubbing. For what? For including you? For letting you come home? For giving you a chance to be part of things? I almost laughed into the dishwater. Letting me come home. To the house my grandmother owned. To wash dishes after being seated at the folding table like a visiting intern. That's generous of him, I said. Nathan ignored the sarcasm. Probably because sarcasm only worked on him when he was the one using it. He's trying to keep the family stable, he said. You don't always make that easy. I turned off the faucet. The sudden quiet made him look up. I dried my hands slowly on a towel and looked at him. He had that relaxed expression he wore when he thought he had already won. Same face he probably used in court. Calm. Polished. Completely allergic to accountability. Nathan, I said, do you know what Grandma left me? The color shifted in his face. Not much. Nathan had good control. Years of being praised for blinking in a professional way had trained him well. But I saw it. A quick tightening around his eyes. His fingers paused on the stem of the wine glass. What are you talking about? He asked. You heard me. Grandma's estate is complicated. That's not an answer. He set the wine glass on the counter. Too carefully. You need to be careful. Claire. There it was again. Careful. The family word for stop asking before you find something we hid badly. I took one step closer. Why? Because I'm wrong? Or because I'm right? He stared at me for maybe 2 seconds. Then walked out of the kitchen without another word. That was when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. If I had been wrong, Nathan would have laughed. He would have patted me on the head with words. He would have made some little joke about me watching too many legal dramas and gone back to his wine. But he didn't laugh. 10 minutes later, my father's voice thundered from the living room. Claire! Get in here. Every conversation in the house seemed to stop at once. I folded the dish towel, placed it on the counter, and walked in. 32 faces turned toward me. Dad stood near the fireplace with his wineglass in one hand and his other hand already lifted, ready to point. He looked almost pleased. Not angry. Exactly. More like a man who had been waiting all night for a reason to begin the scene. Nathan was beside the sofa. His mouth was tight. Vanessa sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching like she had front row tickets to a very uncomfortable play. Aunt Caroline stood near the dining room archway. Eyes narrowed. My mother sat in the corner chair, staring at her coffee cup like it contained instructions for escaping her own life. Dad looked me up and down. What did you say to your brother? I stopped in the middle of the room. I asked him a question. You threatened him? No. I asked him if he knew what Grandma left me. A few relatives shifted. Dad's face hardened. There you go again. Again? Turning a family holiday into a fight about money. I asked one question. You embarrassed your brother? Nathan looked down. Playing the wounded professional. It was a nice touch. Subtle. Annoying. But subtle. I didn't embarrass Nathan. I said. Nathan got nervous. That was the wrong thing to say if my goal was peace. Luckily, Peace had left the building sometime around dessert. Dad stepped forward. You do not get to speak about your brother that way. But he gets to speak about me however he wants? This is not about you. Of course it wasn't. In my family, nothing was about me until someone needed a problem to blame. Dad set his glass on the mantel with a sharp click. You've been disrespectful all evening, he said. First at dinner. Now in the kitchen. You come into this house and start making accusations you don't understand. I glanced at Nathan. I understand more than you think. His eyes flicked to Dad. That tiny movement said everything. Dad saw it too. And for a second, something like panic flashed behind his face. Then he did what Edward Whitmore always did when cornered. He got louder. You are grounded, he said. The room went completely still. I stared at him. Even knowing how far he could go. Even knowing how much he loved an audience. I still needed a second to process that. I'm sorry, I said. What? You heard me. I'm 29. Then act like it. A few people made uncomfortable sounds. Someone near the back gave a nervous laugh. Dad pointed toward the staircase. Go upstairs. You can come down when you are ready to apologize to your brother and to this family. Uncle Rob laughed first. He always did have terrible timing. Then one of my cousins laughed. Then another. Vanessa covered her mouth. But her shoulders moved. Even a few people who looked uncomfortable laughed anyway. Because that was easier than saying, this is strange. Edward. Maybe don't ground your adult daughter, like she forgot to feed the hamster. The laughter grew. 32 relatives laughing in the house my grandmother had built while my father sent me to my childhood bedroom. My face burned. My hands went cold. My whole body wanted to do something. Cry. Yell. Pull the folder from under my mattress and slap the copies onto the coffee table right then. But not yet. That was what I told myself. Not yet. If I exposed the truth in that moment, it would look emotional. Reactive. Like I had snapped because Dad humiliated me. He would twist the whole thing before I finished the first sentence. No. He wanted a scene. I was going to give him timing. I looked at my mother. She still had not moved. Her eyes were wet. But her mouth stayed closed. That hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. There are a lot of ways to abandon someone. Silence is one of the quietest, but it still leaves a mark. Dad pointed again. Go. I looked him directly in the eye. All right? I said. The laughter faded a little. Like the room was disappointed. They expected me to argue. They expected me to prove I was unstable. Greedy. Childish. Whatever label Dad had prepared. They expected tears. I gave them my back. I walked upstairs slowly. Not because I was defeated, but because I wanted every person in that room to watch me leave without giving them the show they came for. When I closed the bedroom door behind me, the sound downstairs returned in pieces. A cough. A low voice. Then laughter again. Softer now. I stood in the dark for a moment, breathing through my nose. Then I moved. I pulled the folder from under the mattress and spread the documents across the bed. Trust copies. Email screenshots. Grandma's letter. The partial trust document. Notes from Arthur. Everything was there. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, took out my phone, and called Arthur Bennett. He answered on the second ring. Claire? He didn't sound sleepy. He sounded like a man who had expected a call exactly like this. I need you tomorrow morning, I said. With the originals. There was a brief pause. What happened? He grounded me. Another pause. Then Arthur said, very carefully. He did what? In front of everyone. I see. I almost smiled. Arthur Bennett's I see carried more judgment than most people's full speeches. He's making the estate announcement tomorrow, I said. He wants everyone present. I think he's going to read his version and make it sound official. Then I'll bring the originals. 8 in the morning? I'll be there. No, I said. Not inside right away. I'm leaving before they wake up. I want him to find the room empty first. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Claire? Once this starts, it may move quickly. I know. And your father may react badly. He already reacts badly. Now he'll just have documents to react to. That time, I heard the smallest breath of amusement from him. Very well, he said. I'll be near the house by 8. Call me when you want me to come in. Thank you. Claire? Yes? Your grandmother would be proud of you. I closed my eyes. For a second, the room disappeared. The laughter downstairs. The old poster on the wall. The twin bed. The whole history of being treated like the family's loose screw. All of it stepped back. Good night, Mr. Bennett. I said, good night. I hung up and set my alarm for 4 in the morning. Then I packed. Not much. 1 change of clothes. Toothbrush. Phone charger. Wallet. The folder went into my canvas tote. Grandma's letter went into the inside pocket of my coat. I left the framed photo of Grandma Margaret on the nightstand. Face down. That was petty. Maybe. I was fine with that. At 4:15, I opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the old floorboards complaining under my socks. I moved slowly. 1 step at a time. Past family photos. Past the study door. Past the dining room, where the good silver still sat in neat little piles, waiting to be put away by someone who was probably me in another version of this story. Not this one. I slipped out through the side door. No slammed doors. No dramatic goodbye. No handwritten note. I had spent enough years explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. The cold air hit my face. And I took my first full breath of the night. My Honda started on the second try. Because even my car liked suspense. I drove 3 miles to a 24-hour diner off the main road. The sign buzzed in the window. Open. Coffee. Breakfast all day. Perfect. I took a booth near the back, facing the door. A waitress with tired eyes poured me coffee without asking too many questions, which made her my favorite person in the world for about 6 minutes. I did not drink it. I just sat there, the folder beside me, watching the sky shift from black to dark blue. At 7:42, my phone buzzed. Nathan, where are you? Dad's looking for you. I stared at the message. Then I turned the phone face down on the table. Let him look. Let him knock on the door. Let him open it and find the bed made. The closet empty. And Grandma's picture face down on the nightstand. Let Edward Whitmore stand there in the silence and realize, for the first time in his life, that sending me away did not mean I had nowhere else to go. It meant I had finally left on purpose. At 1:58, I was standing outside the Whitmore house with Arthur Bennett behind me, and a folder pressed against my ribs like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The front windows glowed warm. Through the glass, I could see people gathered in the living room, sitting in neat rows like they were about to watch a family slideshow, instead of a grown man commit legal nonsense with confidence. My father had arranged the chairs facing the fireplace. Of course he had. Edward Whitmore did not make announcements. He staged verdicts. Arthur stood beside me in a gray suit, holding his brown leather briefcase. He looked calm, not relaxed. Exactly. Calm in the way a surgeon is calm, before cutting into something infected. You ready? He asked. No. I said. He nodded once. Good enough? Honestly, I respected that. I opened the front door and stepped inside. My father was already speaking. He stood in front of the fireplace with a single sheet of paper in his hand, reading glasses low on his nose. White shirt pressed. Watch shining. The whole retired judge costume. Nathan sat near the front beside Vanessa, looking serious and humble, which was impressive for a man who had helped write the lie, being read out loud. My mother sat near the side wall, hands folded so tightly, her knuckles were pale. 32 relatives watched my father like he was giving them the final word on Grandma Margaret's life. As you all know, Dad said, my mother trusted me to handle her affairs. She understood that family assets must be managed by people with experience, judgment, and stability. I stepped into the hallway, just out of sight. Arthur stayed behind me. Dad continued. The Educational Trust, valued at approximately $620,000, will be placed under Nathan's stewardship for the benefit of future generations. A few people nodded. Nathan lowered his eyes like someone had just handed him a burden instead of a bag of stolen money. Dad looked down at his paper. As for Claire, he said, and his voice softened into something fake enough to need a permit. Mother wanted her to receive a gesture of goodwill. $5,000. There it was, $5,000. A gesture. The man was trying to hand me couch cushion money from a trust my grandmother had built to protect me. And he wanted applause for it. Are there any questions? He asked. I walked into the room. Yes, I said. I have one. Every head turned. The room changed so fast you could almost hear it. Aunt Caroline sat up straighter. Uncle Rob lowered his coffee cup. Vanessa's hand slipped off Nathan's arm. My mother looked like she had stopped breathing. My father stared at me. For 1 second, he looked shocked. Then the mask came back. Well, he said. The runaway returns. A few people gave weak little laughs, but they died quickly. The old trick did not land the same way with Arthur Bennett stepping in behind me. Dad's eyes moved to him. His face tightened. I told you to leave this house, he said. Arthur walked forward with his briefcase. No. Mr. Whitmore, you told me to leave your mother's house. That sentence landed like a slap without anyone raising a hand. Dad's jaw flexed. This is a private family matter. No, I said. It stopped being private when you lied to a court. Nobody moved. Even the kids got quiet. Dad's eyes snapped back to me. You need to be very careful. I was careful. I said, that's why I brought copies. Arthur opened his briefcase on the side table. The metal clasps clicked. And somehow that sound was louder than any shouting could have been. He removed a thick cream-colored document and held it up. This is the original irrevocable trust agreement executed by Margaret Eleanor Whitmore 8 years ago. Arthur said. It was signed in my office. Witnessed by 2 independent parties. Notarized. And later confirmed by the trust division at U.S. Bank. My father took 1 step forward. Harold, Arthur, he corrected. And I suggest you let me finish, Aunt Caroline said. Clear and sharp. Let him speak. Edward. That surprised him. It surprised all of us. Honestly, Arthur turned to the room. The trust names one beneficiary. Claire Whitmore. Silence. Not polite silence. Not confused silence. The kind of silence that arrives when people realize the floor is not where they thought it was. Arthur read from the document. The trust corpus includes $620,000 held by U.S. Bank for the benefit of Claire Whitmore. Additionally, the property located in Cannon Beach, Oregon, and the real property at 4714 Hawthorne Street, Portland, Oregon. Transfer to the beneficiary upon the settler's death. Someone in the back whispered. The house? Dad's face changed. That was the first time I saw fear. Not anger. Not irritation. Fear. Arthur continued. Edward Whitmore was named administrative trustee only. As trustee, he was legally obligated to notify the beneficiary, preserve the trust assets, and act in the beneficiary's best interest. He was expressly prohibited from changing the beneficiary, distributing funds to another party, or encumbering the real property without authorization. Uncle Rob leaned forward. So Claire gets the trust? She already has the legal right to it. Arthur said. Nathan stood up. This is not the proper setting for this discussion. I looked at him. Really? Because Dad was fine with the setting 5 minutes ago. A few people turned toward Nathan. His face flushed. Arthur removed another stack of papers. There is more? 3 weeks ago, Edward Whitmore filed a petition requesting permission to amend the beneficiary designation of the trust. He requested that the funds be redirected to Nathan Whitmore. Dad snapped. That petition was preliminary. Arthur looked at him. In that petition? You claimed you were unable to locate Claire Whitmore to obtain her consent? The room stirred. Aunt Caroline said. Unable to locate her? She was here yesterday. Arthur nodded. Yes. She was also reachable by phone, email, and at her known address in Portland. My father's mouth opened. But nothing useful came out. Arthur placed the next page on the table. And then we have the email chain between Edward Whitmore and Nathan Whitmore. Nathan went still. I watched him understand exactly what was coming. Arthur read. She won't fight it. She never fights anything. That's the beauty of it. Dad. The room turned toward Nathan. Vanessa slowly removed her hand from his sleeve and folded it in her lap. That small movement said more than any speech. Nathan's voice came out tight. Those emails were taken out of context. I almost smiled. You accidentally sent them to me. That finished him for a second. Dad tried to recover. My mother was not competent when she signed that document. She was old. She was confused. Arthur did not even blink. He removed one more paper from the briefcase. Margaret anticipated that claim. The same week she signed the trust. She underwent a cognitive evaluation with Dr. Helen Morris. The report confirms she was alert, oriented, and fully capable of understanding her assets, her decisions, and the legal effect of the trust. He placed the report on the table. She knew exactly what she was doing. Then Great Aunt Ruth, Grandma Margaret's younger sister, spoke from the back of the room. She was 81, sharp as a tack, and had spent most of Thanksgiving silently, judging everyone's side dishes. Margaret told me, she said. Every eye turned to her. She told me 8 years ago that Edward would try to take control when she was gone. She said she had protected Claire because Edward would never believe a granddaughter deserved what he thought should go to a grandson. My father looked at her like she had betrayed him. She stared right back. Don't look at me like that, she said. Your mother knew you? That one hurt him. I could see it. Dad turned toward Nathan. Say something. Nathan swallowed. Dad, you're the lawyer. Dad snapped. Fix it. Nathan's face went gray. I told you it was risky. The room froze. I told you, Nathan said, voice low but shaking now. That irrevocable meant irrevocable. You said you could pressure her into staying quiet. And there it was, right in front of everybody. Not from Arthur. Not from me. From Nathan himself. My father slammed his hand down on the back of a chair. You said she wouldn't find out? The sentence hung in the air. Nobody breathed. That was the confession. Ugly. Simple. And too late to pull back. Dad realized it a second after he said it. His face drained. His mouth closed. The retired judge had just testified against himself in his own living room. For once, Edward Whitmore had no courtroom voice left. Arthur collected the documents calmly. I will be filing to remove you as trustee on Monday morning. Dad looked at me then, and suddenly his whole face softened. That old move? The one he used when anger stopped working. Claire, he said. Quieter now. Sweetheart, I was trying to protect you. This kind of money changes people. I was doing what I thought was best. I looked at him, the man who had called me greedy, unstable, childish. The man who had tried to hand me $5,000 from my own inheritance like a tip for good behavior. The man who had grounded me in front of 32 relatives less than 24 hours earlier. No, I said. You were not protecting me. You were protecting your control. My mother started crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just tears running down her face while she looked at my father like she was finally seeing the room without his shadow over it. You owe her an apology? Edward, she said. Her voice shook. But she said it. You have owed her one for years. My father stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. Then he looked around the room. Aunt Caroline was standing beside me now. Great Aunt Ruth was still watching him. Uncle Rob looked embarrassed for laughing the night before. Cousins whispered. Nathan sat down hard. Like his legs had lost interest in the rest of his body, the audience my father had gathered to witness my humiliation had become the jury for his, and the final verdict was written all over their faces. He had not just lost the money, he had lost the room. And for Edward Whitmore, that was worse. By the time Arthur closed his briefcase, the living room did not feel like my father's courtroom anymore. It felt like the moment after a fire alarm stops. Everyone is still standing there, ears ringing, pretending they know what to do next. Nobody did. Not really. A few relatives started gathering coats. Someone told the kids to go wait in the kitchen. Uncle Rob avoided looking at me, which was honestly the most self-awareness he had shown all weekend. My father stood near the fireplace with both hands at his sides, like he was waiting for the room to remember who he was. It didn't. That was the first real consequence. Not the court filings. Not the trust freeze. Not even Nathan's professional mess, which was coming fast and wearing expensive shoes. The first consequence was silence. For once, Edward Whitmore spoke, and the room did not automatically bend toward him. Arthur touched my elbow lightly. Claire, we should go. I nodded. My mother was still sitting in the same chair, crying quietly. Aunt Caroline stood beside her with one hand on her shoulder. Nathan was near the front window, whispering to Vanessa. Or trying to. Vanessa had that tight, polished look women get when they are deciding whether their husband is a partner or a public relations problem. As Arthur and I walked toward the door, my father finally found his voice. This is not over, he said. I stopped but did not turn around right away. For 29 years. That sentence would have pulled me back. I would have explained, apologized, softened, tried to keep the peace. I would have carried his anger out of the room like it was my assigned luggage. This time, I just looked over my shoulder. No, I said. It's finally starting. Then I walked out. Arthur filed the first motion Monday morning. He did not wait. He did not send a polite warning letter. He did not call my father for a friendly professional discussion where two men used careful words to avoid saying theft. He went straight to the Multnomah County Circuit Court and filed a petition to remove Edward Whitmore as trustee of the Margaret E. Whitmore, Irrevocable Trust. The petition was very clean, very specific, very Arthur. Failure to notify the beneficiary, attempted unauthorized amendment of an irrevocable trust, misrepresentation to the court regarding the beneficiary's location, breach of fiduciary duty. That last phrase sounded almost too polite for what my father had done. Breach of fiduciary duty. It made it sound like he had misplaced a form. What he had really done was try to erase me from my grandmother's final act of love, because he could not stand the idea of me having something he did not control. Arthur also requested an emergency freeze on the trust assets. That meant no withdrawals, No transfers. No changes. No quiet little paperwork tricks. The $620,000 at U.S. bank stayed exactly where it was until the court sorted things out. I liked that part. For once, my father had to sit still and wait for someone else to decide what he was allowed to touch. The temporary order came faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Edward was suspended from his role as trustee, and an independent fiduciary was appointed to oversee the account while the court reviewed the full record. Arthur told me this was not the final ruling, but it was a strong sign. My father did not contest it. That surprised me until Arthur explained why. He has no good argument, he said over the phone. And your brother's emails made the bad arguments dangerous? Dangerous. Another one of those lawyer words that sounds small until you realize it is standing in front of a cliff. Nathan's problem started separately. Arthur filed a complaint with the Oregon State Bar. He included the email chain, the draft petition, and the conflict of interest. Nathan had helped my father prepare a filing that would benefit Nathan personally. He had also participated in a plan to claim I could not be located when he knew exactly where I lived, worked, and spent Thanksgiving night. That is not a gray area. That is not family helping family. That is a lawyer stepping into a hole and bringing his own shovel. I did not celebrate when I heard the complaint had been accepted for review. I thought I would. I thought I would feel some huge wave of satisfaction. Maybe even a little villain music in my head. But mostly, I felt tired. Nathan had been my brother before he became my father's favorite weapon. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bike when I was 6. Even though he let go too early, and I crashed into a hydrangea bush. I remembered watching cartoons with him on Saturday mornings. I remembered thinking he was the smartest person in the world because he could beat me at Monopoly and make pancakes shaped like letters. Then I remembered him writing, "She won't fight it. She never fights anything." Both things were true. That is what makes family betrayal so ugly. It does not erase the good memories. It stains them. And then you have to decide what to do with the picture. The State Bar investigation took months. But the damage started almost immediately. Word spread. It always does. Lawyers may love confidentiality, but families love whispering. And the legal community is basically a small town with better shoes. Nathan's biggest client, a commercial real estate firm, ended their relationship within days of hearing about the complaint. Officially, they were moving in a different strategic direction, which is business language for, "We do not want your ethical thunderstorm near our money." Vanessa stopped coming to family events. Not that there were many family events after that. The Whitmore calendar became very quiet. Funny how people suddenly discover busy schedules when the family patriarch has been publicly exposed for trying to steal from his daughter. Aunt Caroline still called me every Sunday. Great Aunt Ruth sent me a card with a handwritten note that said, "Margaret knew what she was doing." Evan texted me every few days to check in. Some cousins apologized. Some disappeared. Both reactions told me something useful. My mother called twice the first week and did not know what to say either time. "I'm sorry," she said once. "For what part?" I asked. She cried then. I did not say it to be cruel. I said it because I needed her to understand that this was not one bad Thanksgiving. This was years of looking down at the carpet while I was cut into smaller pieces in front of her. "I should have stood up for you," she said. "Yes?" I said. "You should have." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "I was afraid of him." I know. That was the truth. I did know. But knowing why someone failed you does not make the failure disappear. It only gives it a name. My father called 3 days after the emergency trustee order. I stared at his name on my phone for a long time before answering. Not because I owed him anything. Because some small, stubborn part of me wanted to hear the apology. I wanted to know if public truth had done what private pain never could. Maybe he would say, "Claire, I was wrong." Maybe he would say, "I'm sorry." Maybe he would say, Your grandmother loved you, and I should have honored that, I answered. Hello. His voice came through tight and cold. You've destroyed this family. There it was. Not an apology. Not even close. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so predictable it felt lazy. The man had tried to steal my inheritance. Lie to a court. Humiliate me in front of 32 relatives. And hand me $5,000 like a coupon for surviving his parenting. But somehow, I had destroyed the family. I walked to the window of my apartment and looked down at the wet street below. No. Dad, I said. You did that? He made a sharp sound. You brought strangers into private family business? You filed a false petition in court. That made it legal business. I was protecting what your grandmother built. No, I said. You were trying to take what she left me. You don't understand what this kind of money does to people. I understand what control does to people. He went quiet. That was the first time in my life I had ever heard him run out of words before I did. Then he said, You have no idea what you've done. I do. I said, I brought the receipts. He hung up. My hand was shaking when I lowered the phone. But I did not cry. Not that time. Arthur called later that afternoon to update me. The independent fiduciary had confirmed the trust balance. The funds were intact. The Cannon Beach cottage was correctly listed inside the trust. The Hawthorne Street deed transfer was being processed. Edward had no authority to sell, mortgage, transfer, or occupy the property against the terms of the trust once the court finalized the order. In plain English, my father had lost access. Nathan's disciplinary process continued. In the end, he received a 6-month suspension and mandatory ethics review. He quietly left active practice and moved into corporate consulting, which sounded respectable enough if you did not ask too many questions. Vanessa separated from him around the same time. I heard that through Aunt Caroline, who delivered gossip like a public service announcement. I did not call him. He did not call me. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he was waiting for me to reach out first, so he could feel like less of a coward. I did not know. For the first time in my life, I accepted that I did not have to know. The court finalized Edward's removal as trustee a month later. Arthur served as interim trustee until the assets could be transferred properly. Then, after one last round of signatures, the trust moved under my control. The money was real. The cottage was real. The Hawthorne house was real. But the strangest part was not receiving any of it. The strangest part was watching the people who had built their power on my silence discover that silence had ended. They had not been beaten by yelling. They had not been beaten by revenge fantasies or dramatic speeches. They had been beaten by dates, signature, emails, bank confirmations, and one dead woman who knew her son well enough to plan 8 years ahead. My grandmother did not leave me chaos. She left me proof. And proof, handled correctly, can be louder than any room full of people laughing. The first time I unlocked the Hawthorne house as its legal owner, I stood in the doorway for almost a full minute before stepping inside. Not because I was scared. Not exactly. It was more like my body needed a second to catch up with the paperwork. A month earlier, that house had been my father's kingdom. His chair, his study, his rules, his voice bouncing off every wall like the place had been built to carry it. Now I had a plain brass key in my hand, my name on the deed, and a court order that said Edward Whitmore was not in charge anymore. That last part deserved its own little song. But I behaved like an adult and only smiled in the driveway. The house smelled the same when I walked in. Wood polish, old books, lavender from the sachets Grandma Margaret used to tuck into every closet. The entry table still had the little ceramic bowl where she used to drop loose change and garden gloves. The living room looked almost untouched. Except it felt different without my father sitting by the fireplace waiting to judge somebody's life choices before the coffee got cold. I walked through slowly, The dining room still had the long oak table where he had praised Nathan like the family prince and treated me like a loose receipt. The kitchen still had the sink where I had scrubbed pans while everyone else sat around pretending basic manners were optional. The staircase still led to my old bedroom, where I had called Arthur Bennett and changed the direction of my life with one quiet decision. Then I opened the study door, my father's study. That room had always felt like a courtroom with better leather. Dark shelves, heavy desk, framed certificates, photos of Edward shaking hands with judges, city officials, and men who all seemed to own the same serious tie. His chair sat behind the desk, angled slightly toward the window, as if even the furniture knew it was supposed to look powerful. I stood there and thought, absolutely not. By the end of that week, the legal books were boxed. The handshake photos were wrapped in newspaper. The heavy desk went into storage because I did not need a piece of furniture that looked like it wanted to interrupt me. I painted the walls a clean, warm white, brought in my drafting table, rolled out my design plans, and lined the shelves with plant guides, soil samples, seed catalogs, and binders full of client notes. The first morning I worked there, sunlight came through the window and landed across a sketch of a courtyard garden. I was designing for a school in northeast Portland. I sat back and looked around. My father's old throne room had become a design studio. That felt better than revenge. It felt useful. The trust money changed my life. But not in the way people think money changes your life. I did not run out and buy a sports car. I did not suddenly start wearing designer clothes to grocery stores. I did not develop a mysterious interest in yachts. I paid off my student loans first. $38,412. I remember the exact number because I stared at it for years like it was carved into my forehead. When I sent the payment, I sat at the kitchen table and waited for the confirmation screen. Paid in full. 2 words. No fireworks. No music. Just a screen on a laptop, and me sitting there with one hand over my mouth. I had carried that debt from the year I left law school. The year my father decided I had embarrassed the family by choosing a life that did not come with a courtroom. Paying it off did not erase what he said. It did not rewrite the years I spent feeling behind, but it gave me room to breathe. After that, I used part of the trust to open my own small landscape design studio in the Alberta Arts District. Nothing fancy. 1 front room. 1 back office. A bathroom with questionable plumbing. And a window big enough for plants. I named it Whitmore Landscape Design. Yes, Whitmore. People asked why I kept the name. The answer was simple. My grandmother was a Whitmore too. I was not going to let Edward have the whole word. I put my name on the door in simple black letters. Claire Whitmore. Landscape Design. The first day I unlocked that office, I brought in a pothos plant from my apartment, a coffee maker, and Grandma Margaret's old gardening gloves. I set the gloves on the shelf behind my desk. Not as decoration, as a reminder. She had built things before me. I was just continuing the work. The hawthorn garden took longer. Grandma's garden had been neglected for almost 2 years while she was sick, and after she died, the peony beds were tangled. The boxwood had grown wild. The stone path was buried under leaves and mud. The bird bath was dry and tilted to one side, like it had given up on the whole family. Which, honestly, fair. I spent weekends out there in old jeans and work gloves, cutting back dead stems, clearing weeds, aerating the soil, and trying not to think about how angry I was. That part surprised me. I thought winning would make the anger disappear. It didn't. Winning gave me safety. It gave me options. It gave me proof. But anger still came up in small moments. When I found one of Grandma's old plant markers cracked in the dirt. When I remembered my father calling the house his. When I passed the folding table stored in the basement and thought about where he had seated me, so I worked. Not because working fixes everything. It doesn't. But soil is honest. If the roots are alive, you can help something come back. If something is dead, You stop pretending and clear it out. There was a lesson in that. Whether I wanted one or not, Aunt Caroline came by most Sundays with coffee and unsolicited opinions. Both strong. Evan helped me rebuild 2 raised beds and only complained 3 times, which for him was basically sainthood. Great Aunt Ruth sent me a handwritten list of the peony varieties Grandma had loved. Written in script, so neat, it made my grocery lists look criminal. Some relatives apologized. Some didn't. A few sent long messages explaining how uncomfortable they had felt during Thanksgiving. Which was interesting, because I had been uncomfortable for 29 years, and somehow had managed not to help anyone commit fraud. But I read the messages anyway. I answered the ones that sounded honest. I ignored the ones that sounded like people trying to crawl back into the good version of the story without admitting they had laughed during the bad one. Nathan sent one text. I understand. That was all. 2 words. No apology. No explanation. No, I'm sorry I helped Dad try to steal from you, and then acted surprised when consequences arrived. Just, I understand. I read it twice. Set the phone down. And did not reply. Understanding is a start. It is not accountability. My mother came to the house for the first time in April. She stood on the porch for a long moment before knocking, even though she knew I was home. When I opened the door, she looked smaller. Not physically. Maybe. Just less covered by my father's presence. Hey. Honey. She said. Hey. Mom. She held a paper bag from the bakery near her apartment. I brought scones. Of course she did. Helen Whitmore could walk into a burning building with baked goods and unresolved guilt. I let her in. For a while. We sat in the kitchen and talked about safe things. Weather. Work. The neighbor's dog. Aunt Caroline's blood pressure, which Aunt Caroline discussed like a national issue. Then Mom looked toward the garden and went quiet. She loved that garden. She said, I know. I should have helped her more near the end. I did not answer right away. Then she said, I should have helped you more too. That was the first real sentence. Not perfect. Not enough to fix everything. But real. I looked at her. Yes. I said, you should have. She nodded and started crying. This time, I did not rush to comfort her. That was new for me. I loved my mother. But I had spent too many years managing her guilt so she would not have to face it. So I let the silence sit there until she wiped her face. I was afraid of him. She said, I know. That doesn't excuse it. No. I said, it doesn't. She took that in. I could see how hard it was for her not to defend herself. Not to explain. Not to ask me to make it easier. Then she said, I want to do better. So I handed her a pair of gloves. We spent the afternoon planting tulip bulbs along the front walk. We did not solve 29 years in one afternoon. That is not how real life works. There was no big speech. No perfect hug. No music swelling while we forgave everything. We planted bulbs. Side by side. Quietly. It was enough for that day. Edward never apologized. I heard through Aunt Caroline that he had moved into an apartment across town. He told people I had stolen the house. Then he told other people Arthur had manipulated Grandma. Then he told a third version where Nathan was somehow the victim too. My father changed the details depending on who was listening. But the ending was always the same. Edward Whitmore had been wronged. Some people need to be the victim so badly they will trip over the truth and sue the floor. I stopped waiting for him to become honest. That was one of the biggest freedoms of my life. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I drove to the Cannon Beach cottage for a weekend alone. The cottage was smaller than I remembered, with weathered cedar siding, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and sand in places sand had no business being. The ocean air hit me as soon as I stepped out of the car. Cold. Salty. Clean. Inside. Everything still felt like Grandma. Old paperbacks on the shelf. A blue kettle on the stove. 2 mismatched mugs by the sink. A blanket folded over the back of the sofa. On the kitchen table, I found a wooden box. I had not seen it before. Inside were photos. May at 6. Holding a plastic shovel on the beach. May at 10. Standing beside Grandma in matching raincoats. May at 16. Pretending not to smile, while she took a picture of me sketching on the porch. Me at 22. Sunburned, and laughing with my hair blown across my face. Under the photos was one short letter. Claire. If you are reading this, then you were brave enough? I knew you would be. This cottage is yours. It always was. I was just keeping it warm for you. Come here when the world gets too loud. Build something good. I'm so proud of you. Always. Grandma, I sat on the porch with that letter in my lap and cried. Not the hidden kind. Not the bathroom kind. Not the quiet tears you wipe away before someone tells you you are being dramatic. I cried because someone had known me. Really known me. Not the version my father invented. Not the version Nathan dismissed. Me. Grandma had not just left me money. She left me proof that I had been seen. The tide was out. Haystack Rock stood in the distance. Solid and unbothered. The wind pushed against the little herb garden I had planted by the steps. Rosemary. Thyme. Lavender. Tough plants. The kind that do better when the air is rough. I understood that feeling. Here is what I know now. Silence is not consent. Sometimes silence is survival. But if people benefit from your silence long enough, they start calling it permission. Waiting is not weakness. There is a difference between being unable to fight and choosing the right time to bring your evidence, and family does not heal because everyone agrees to forget what happened. Family only has a chance to heal when the truth is placed on the table and nobody is allowed to slide it under the rug just to keep dinner comfortable. My grandmother gave me the money. Yes, she gave me the houses. But the real inheritance was knowing I was worth protecting. Not someday. Not if I became more impressive. Not if I finally made my father proud. I was worth protecting exactly as I was. A woman with student loans. A small apartment. A used Honda. A design career my family mocked because they did not understand anything that grew quietly before it bloomed. I still have the old architecture poster from my childhood bedroom. It hangs now in my studio. Above my drafting table. Edges still curled. Every morning. I look at it and think about the girl who taped it to her wall and dreamed about building beautiful things while everyone around her told her that was not enough. They were wrong. She was enough. And so was I.